For the invitation. It's pretty exciting to fly from California to the Sorbonne to talk about cannabis science. I am from Northern California, which was the first incubator for medicinal cannabis science that's occurred in the modern times. We legalized in 1996. I was going to go in a slightly different direction, but Sebastian has asked me to talk about my experience with standardization. So I'm just going to spend the next 15 minutes telling you as much as I can about what we did and why we did it and what has happened. So I had a very severe autoimmune or rheumatological condition that went undiagnosed for 10 years. When I finally found out what it was, they started feeding me the biologics, the drugs that most of you are well aware of. They cost about $6,000 a month, and they kill T cells. I rapidly moved through every one of the biologics because a couple of them started to work, and then I would have devastating side effects. They would have been terminal side effects if I continued. So the last one I took was Imbral. I gave it to myself, a shot in my thigh twice, and for 6 years we weren't certain I would live. In fact, most of my doctors told me later they had no hope I would live. I was down to 99 pounds, 14% body fat, and desperately trying to regain some weight to be able. I was wearing coats in 80-degree weather to give you a sense of what that's like. So at any rate, I reluctantly turned to cannabis. I felt that it was nonsense, that it was medicinal. I felt that I wasn't a Republican in California. I thought people should have access to it and that it was okay to use it for psychoactivity, but it wasn't my thing. And I felt that I would be addicted if I used it very much. I later learned that my own government says there is no addiction capability. There is no physical mechanism. National Institute of Health says that. But I probably wouldn't have believed it before my own experience. So what happened is that I reluctantly turned to smoking a joint, trying to remember to do that once a day, didn't really like doing it, and I would forget or not, and so then I gradually noticed that if I did it 5 or 6 times a week, I had a slight improvement. Anything in my disease that created a slight improvement was big news. So I thought, all right, I can't know where this is grown. I can't know who grew it. I can't really know the strain because 60% of the strains at that time were identified incorrectly by the growers. There was no testing, and I was an organic food, I was a health food fanatic from the time I was 18. I really believed in whole food. So I took 100 cases of wine out of my wine cellar and I put in 2 4x4 trays of cannabis clones. And I started growing it, and I found that it did help, and I could rely on the purity of what I was doing, but it didn't help enough. So I went on a mission, and that mission was, how do I make this work for people as sick as me? I heard about Rick Simpson, which probably most of you have, and I thought, wow, here's this janitor in Canada who says he's saved a whole lot of people's lives and he's even cured rheumatoid arthritis. But when I looked at his process, it was pretty disgusting. It was Teflon utensils, it was non-stick, rice cookers, it was naphtha. They've done studies in the Netherlands that show naphtha, which is jet fuel, is the stickiest of all possible substances. So I had to do something better than that, and I decided to standardize, to take this as far as I could for myself. So I worked with known genetics. I grew everything for the first 5 to 6 years, and then we standardized, and I took the formulations that I created, and we did them according to pharmaceutical standards, not, we did it by weight, not liquid. We got into, I saw us as a cannabis compounding pharmacy. And we had no ambitions about working with anyone else. I was trying to do it to save myself. But I worked with a lot of pretty famous doctors who knew the impossibility of my condition, and I had tried everything from cutting-edge German techniques used in cancer to traditional. One time I was on 68 different drugs, and none of it worked. I did gain 60 pounds in about 3 months, which wasn't a very desired effect, but it didn't do anything for the pain. So when my doctors saw what was happening with me, they asked me, one of them in particular said, why? Why are you better? And I literally shook and told them that it was legal, but I was afraid to explore with them what I was doing. I didn't want to be seen as a weirdo. And remember, if you can, that this is 2010 when I'm talking to this doctor. I started this in 2008. And even in California, there were still federal raids going on against certain people who use the state laws in cannabis. It wasn't a very comfortable experience. But when I made the extract, I found that I got better, so much better, that my doctors asked me about it, and then they sent me some cancer patients. And they sent me two. One had 6 weeks to live. He'd glio patient, both of them, and they'd run out of all possible options. He'd already lived 3 years, which was way beyond. So we said, why not try? And he had a paralyzed left arm, and in 3 weeks, the left arm was fully functional. So MD Anderson they rushed him in, and they saw that the tumor had shrunk 60%. And so then in 7 weeks, they declare him to be in remission. And that started a floodgate. And if I can stop to tell you that I never intended to do this. I did not set out to do anything for anyone else with cancer or cannabis. This came to us. And I, for 3 years, refused to completely believe it. The doctors believed it before I felt certain that they were telling the truth completely. It was hard to believe because what they said later, after they started sending me these patients, he sent me over 100. Only 28 would come to California and do it legally. And he said that 26 of them, stage 4 second occurrence patients, went into remission. I was actually frightened when I heard that. I mean, I had famous doctors coming to me saying, change your name, move, you are in danger. This isn't going to be tolerated. And I'm trying to evaluate it as a citizen scientist, right? So I've been told that something I did was so efficacious that famous oncologists are actually and literally knocking on my door. And I have a task that without any analytics, there were no labs then, okay? So later when we find out it works, there are labs, but at the time that I was doing it, there weren't. And the labs then when they came in, primarily just tested for about 20 terpenes if they were good, and about 12 cannabinoids. So we were working in an atmosphere of not being able to understand or know, and so my attitude was that I would preserve. To the best of my ability, I would control genetics, I would standardize to pharmaceutical standards as I could, and we would preserve everything we did, and we would preserve our data. So when this, let's see, I'm jumping around a bit because I'm trying to give you a flavor of the story, but also let you know some of the facts that came out of it. In 2009, I found CBD came to California for the first time, and I said, if THC extract can be so helpful to me, why can't we do a CBD extract? And of course we can, and we did, and we were the first in California to do so. Later, when the labs were able to test it, they saw that we had as high as 72% CBD and as high as 82% THC, and this was from an ethanol process, and they had never seen that ever before. So we got a lot of attention, and the value of that attention is that we've been able to be good stewards. We've learned a lot about THC, we've learned a lot about CBD, we've learned about the combinations. I intended to go into the research that shows whole plant extracts efficacy being higher, but Christina Sanchez took that research so much further. I don't need to talk about Roger Pertwee's work or Ben Chabot showing that the extracts are superior and that CBD and THC combined work better together, and that the more of a whole plant extract you have, the better it works. So let's see, what else can I tell you about? We use an ethanol extraction only. We're kind of fanatics about it. We believe that ethanol is the gift of the herbalist to cannabis, and cannabis is an herb and should be treated and dealt with as from the clinical herbal science. That's primarily where we've worked from, the biochemistry and the clinical herbal sciences. We have been lucky in, as Christina said, that the money has not been a problem. With the attention we got, money has been being thrown at us for a long time. 4 companies tried to take us public 3 years ago. I've luckily said no. I came from finance. I understood what happens when investors come in. It's usually the end of most good ideas, honestly. We have been able, however, to get the Facebook founders invested in 2016 and the YouTube funders invested later that year. We've just closed a Series B, and we're just seeing one very important thing I forgot to tell you is that on the way to the standardization, in 2015, I filed 2 patents. And we were told repeatedly that you cannot patent a plant, anything that you do with that plant. I went to 4 different cannabis attorneys in California who had patent experience, and they all confidently told me I couldn't. But coming from the business world that I did before I was sick, I had very high-level connections to patent attorneys in San Francisco, and finally the managing partner at Kilpatrick Townsend said, yes, we'll do this. And when we walked into a high-level biotech patent firm, they said, absolutely, you can do this. So we have an ethanol process patent, and we have a combination of over 3,000 herbals combinations and vitamin combinations with cannabis that are vetted by efficacy and bioavailability enhancement or attacking the same targets in a positive way. One of the things that happened to us when I began working with the patients that the doctors referred to me, we went and visited Sean McAllister, who was working in San Francisco with the Sativex, and he was using the GW ratio of the 1.2 to 1 of THC to CBD. And he was working with triple-negative breast cancer. So the patients and I went to him, and he was kind enough to say, the only thing I would add to what you're doing, which was giving super high potent THC extracts at night, was that he would have the patients also smoke CBD during the day. And again, remember, this had just begun to be available in California. So if you've ever tried to teach a cannabis-naive cancer patient how to roll a joint, you would understand why I was a very early adopter of vape pens. So we then found vape pens to be highly toxic. They are represented as having metals that they don't. The temperature would turn the polypropylene glycol, the viscosity agent that was used, in about 99% of the pens, it would turn it into formaldehyde at 500 degrees, which means it's carcinogenic. So we were just always finding out these things and trying to educate people and trying to find solutions. And the solution we found for that is that I patented a vitamin E viscosity agent that is actually neuroprotective, and you don't cough when you use our vape. So that was really helpful for patients. It's gotten to the point that in some ways that product is what we get more attention for around the world now, because we were the first to do this in a professional way, but it's broadly known and tons of people are working with cancer patients. What we have turned to is trying to continue to be a restlessly innovating manufacturing and R&D lab that takes cannabis seriously. We've been doing that since 2008, and as it gets more and more attention, we don't any longer have to be the one educating doctors. We don't any longer have to be the ones having patient coaches that teach the dosing and hold the hands, because the knowledge is becoming spread in the medical community. So as I am released from doing all jobs, I am able to focus on doing the R&D and the manufacturing and to make innovative products that meet real human needs. So we've learned a lot about cannabis. I'm not sure how much more time, but okay, all right. I also would like to take questions, because we have been doing this for 10 years, and in California it's been legal now for 22. And all right, so I want to take questions, but let me tell you a little bit about that experiment too. We were without regulations. Okay, in 1996, the people voted in cannabis legality for medicinal purposes only. It was done by proposition, by ballot. It wasn't done by thinking it out. It wasn't done by congressmen getting together. So what we had was a big mess. And that big mess became the medicinal cannabis incubator for the world. In Colorado, where they went directly to adult use with good regulations, they have a much less messy system. It's our, we wish we had it in some ways, but they never developed any medicinal aspects. So we now have regulations that tightly govern all aspects. We have some of the most rigorous regulations. We went past many other states in California. But we were lucky enough to have very good regulators, and we were able to actually impact some of those regulations. They met with us privately for 2 hours, told us to not leave California because they know the value of what we're doing, and they were proposing some things that was going to make it pretty hard for us to treat patients with high-potency medication. We went to public hearings and we said things like, you're protecting tourists very well, but you're gutting the industry that has been created in California if you don't allow high potency. So when there is a bias against psychoactivity that is very, very powerful, and people tend to believe that they're being scientific when they talk about these prejudices that actually come from economic and other collective notions that have been repackaged as science, and it's not science in any way. Prior to modern times, psychoactivity was used to heal mental trauma, was used to help transition. Males in indigenous societies were taken through it as a rite of passage. Females weren't really encouraged, and I'm glad that we are now beginning to access some of those same tools that males in tribes have always been allowed to use in some societies. But I think we really need to question our bias against psychoactivity. I was never one who used it for fun. My most potent high I enjoyed was a couple of glasses of Pinot Noir. But going through this experience myself has changed my personality in some ways that lots of psychotherapy and a lot of analysis couldn't do. It's been extraordinarily helpful at increasing my affinity for other people, at making me more open, at making me less afraid to make mistakes, and to understand that perfectionism isn't really the penultimate thing humans are to be. So I think that we need a very serious reexamination for the opioid addiction, the reduction in harm. We need to get off the white-knuckling approach to getting off addiction. We need to offer people whatever will work that does very little harm. And I'd say cannabis comes in very strongly there. We use only the flower. And some of the companies that started 3 or 4 or 5 years ago after me in California, some of the good ones have copied that partially. But we're unique still in that we even trim the flower. Now, if you know much about the economics of cannabis, what you understand is that most extracts are made from what was considered garbage. So we've taken something that was a criminal liability that could be found around your property, and we've turned it into a powerhouse of economics in cannabis. You can't tell the difference when you look at that extract if it came from trim or if it came from bud. But we have recently, our insistence on that has recently been verified. Ethan Russo is the one who said, and he was the past medical director of GW Pharma, and he talked about that the trichomes produce different quality and quantity of cannabinoids and terpenes on the bud than they do even from the leaf around the bud. So you are compromising, you are not taking everything that plant has to give you if you don't make an extract from the bud. So we were unique in that. There's some interesting and other good companies following us that do it. We insist. If we're doing things that are more for comfort, if it's not out of options, then I'm open to using trim for economics and to make our medicine more available and affordable. And that brings me to another point that I think it's a painful one. As Raquel was talking and saying that one of the most important things we need to do is allow access and allow medicine to cost less. Cannabis extracts, even if they're most expensive and professional, probably cost about 1/7 of what a cancer protocol would cost, but it's still not cheap. It's not a dime bag. And we have to pay. We can't have it all ways. You know, if we want patented, standardized medicine done in a pharmaceutical standard way, then it costs money. I've been called a Wall Street broker 7 years ago, and my life was threatened on Facebook by a competitor because I dared to do this in a way that was serious and professional. But we have to think about that, you know. We have to be aware of what our choices are.
Thank you very much, Constance. Pleasure. Thank you very much again. Mais merci beaucoup à tout le monde. Merci à tous les intervenants. Pour le petit mot de la fin, Bertrand, président de l'association, qui grâce à lui on a pu, et puis grâce à tous nos soutiens entre les associations. Donc ouais, un grand big up. Merci Bertrand. Merci à tout le monde.
Merci à vous d'avoir été là toute la journée et on verra pour la prochaine édition. Merci beaucoup. En tout cas, les professionnels de santé, vous allez être contactés par l'association parce qu'on voudrait mettre en place les réseaux de professionnels de santé qui vont commencer à travailler sur la problématique en France. Donc ne vous étonnez pas dans quelques temps d'être contactés par nous. Voilà, je vous remercie beaucoup d'avoir assisté à la conférence et bonne soirée. Au revoir.